Hi, I'm Phil Cooke, and as you can see, I just got back from working out. And on today's podcast, we're going to talk about a different kind of workout. That's a creative workout. My guest is Ben Stapley. Now, Ben's been a creative leader for many, many, many years. And I've always been impressed with his ability to inspire volunteers, to inspire creative team members, to inspire your staff. He's just amazing at getting people to maximize and be their best. So we're going to talk about, first of all, we're going to answer some questions people have been sending in about the creative process, about leading people, particularly about church and ministry media related issues. But stay tuned, because at the end, we're going to talk about brainstorming, how to maximize a brainstorming session, how to get the right people in the room, who are those people, how to use that time to maximize the ideas that come out of that kind of session. So this is going to be a great episode. You're going to want to stay tuned. And I think when you meet Ben and talk to him, you're going to see that there's a lot of things you could learn and areas you could grow to lead and inspire creative people. So stay tuned. Ben Stapley, welcome back. You're becoming becoming a regular on this podcast.
I'm glad to see the $20 I slipped you via Venmo paid itself off. Thank you for this.
Let everyone know that I can be bribed. That's not a problem. I'm open to that.
You have a price.
Well, I keep having you back because whenever you're on, I get some great follow-up questions from listeners and viewers out there who want to know more. And so I think it's good. In fact, I think today we'll focus the episode on some of these questions that I've been getting from church people, a lot of pastors, a lot of communication people, media people, executive pastors are asking me to follow up on some things that we've discussed. So I've pinpointed 4 or 5 questions I want to throw at you, and let's just kind of roll with it and see how it goes. I would start with, one person asked me, what's the difference between a communication director to church and a media director to church? Is there one? And what should it be? What do you think about that?
I think as long as you have an intern covering all these things, you're good to go for. I know we are talking offline about this. So even for the people listening, right? Let's acknowledge first of all that some churches are like, wait, 2 different positions? This is incredible. This is for churches that are mid-size or mega-size in relationship to where they're going. So if you have one person doing that, it's great. But as you get larger and you have more departments within the church and more focuses in the church, and I know you're going to go this way as well, being able to think through who is trying to hit your internal audience and how do they handle that versus your external audience is a really helpful framework to give people, mainly because they're really 2 different types of people that you're trying to hit. The platforms, the way you're trying to hit them is different. Not just the means of the communication, but the communication itself is going to frame it. So generally speaking, if you're going to have 2 people, think that way: who's internally, who's externally.
That's a great separation. In fact, it's funny. And speaking of internally, I worked with a church one time a few years ago that had a communication director that was hyperactive, to say the least. She was flooding the church with information. They called me because nobody was responding to any of their communication. They said, "Phil, what's going on?" I go in, did some focus groups with members of the congregation, and found out they just get flooded with so much information from the communication person that they just delete everything. And she was sending out 3 or 4 email blasts a week, a printed letter a week. Every quarter, she sent out a 30-page printed guide about what's going on at the church. She was sending out e-blasts constantly, and people were just hitting delete. So I do think as you get to be a bigger church, you need to separate, how we're communicating to the internal people, the members, versus how we're communicating to the outside world, which could be live streaming, it could be short videos, it could be television in some cases. So I think that's good. The kind of a springboard from that is, and I've got this a lot, this question a lot. Who should the media director report to? In your experience, what's been the best reporting avenue?
Again, it depends on scale and scope of the church. I'll start with people who they shouldn't report to and then go from there. Not to the LP. The lead pastor, probably, especially if you're church 500 and above, they just probably are too, they don't want to get pulled down into the weeds that deep in terms of meeting with them regularly once a week, helping strategize what the communication plan is. They need to keep their head higher than that. So not the LP. And then also sometimes, it's we were talking about this offline as well. Sometimes a worship pastor, I would say that's not a good person either, who really has a particular lane to be in, because if they have that particular lane and the communications director reports up to them, well, guess what? They're going to get a lot of airtime and a lot of promotion. Guess the team that we're going to push for people to serve on. It's going to be the worship team. Guess what's going to land on the social media clips? It's going to be another highlight of the vocalist doing that vocal run. It's going to be all that stuff. So those are two bad examples: lead pastor and the worship pastor, the creative arts pastor. The creative arts pastor might be good because they're a little wider than a worship pastor. Or another really good potential is an XP. The reason I like XP because they have a big enough picture of what's happening.
That's executive pastor for some of you that aren't sure.
Yes, and they're not in the trenches or they're not siloed in a particular ministry. And also, I'm an XP. Usually, they're a little more calculated and we do have hearts. I'll say we do have hearts and emotions, but sometimes they're appropriately removed from something. And so because they're not feeling these intense emotions with this ministry is so passionate to me, they can be a little more dispassionate and neutral in terms of, no, we're going to give equal weight to different things, or we're actually going to give more weight to this other thing because it's a growth engine for our church. And I'm not going to play nice with our different departments. And the one that's getting less airtime is going to be mad. And I'm okay with that because they don't see the bigger picture of where we need to go for the next 5 to 10 years. And the fact that their department is important, but it doesn't actually help us get to that position and that location that we want to get to. And therefore it's not getting as much airtime in this season.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I've never encountered a situation where the media or communications team reporting to the worship pastor or worship team really worked very well, because you said it very well. Suddenly the worship team, the worship segments of the church, when they're filmed, look amazing. And the sermon, maybe not so much. And yet, I don't know, this is a good question for you. In my experience, I love good worship. I love great music. I was a piano player. I've been a piano player all my life. And so I love music. However, I discovered people generally will pick a church based on the pastor.
Yes.
I know when Kathleen and I were small, we got to go to Church on the Way in LA, Jack Hayford's church. Jack Hayford is like the Protestant Pope to me. I mean, he's just absolutely amazing. And there was a time when we first started going that the Sunday school program wasn't terribly good. And we actually went to another local church on Saturday night. No, we went on Sunday morning for the kids to go to a great Sunday school program while we went to Church on the Way on Saturday night and to hear Jack. And so people will put up with a bad nursery program. They'll put up with bad music if they can hear a great, gifted, called preacher. So I really, never want to let the media team shortchange the preaching, teaching, because with the live streaming, it's so important. With video clips, it's so important. With television, if you happen to do that, it's incredibly important. So along that line, who are the first, if you were a pastor starting out, who were the first 3 hires you'd make in the communication or media department?
Ooh, that's a great question. I don't know. I'll answer that in a second. Before I even go to the people, I would look at the priorities. What are you trying to prioritize? And I would go through the 3 S's. I would go make sure that your site, your website is good. Make sure that your stream, people watching online, is good. And then make sure your social is good. So I would go your site, your stream, your social in that order. And so in terms of who's wearing what hat, and do you potentially have a Swiss Army knife who can try to do all 3, or you get one person to cover 2 of those? That there's a lot of interchangeability there. But as long as you're hitting that priority in that order, I think you're in a good position, because again, people are going to check out your website before they come to you. They're going to want to watch a full service before they sit their butt in a seat and attend it. And then they may follow you on social media. I see a lot of churches spending a lot, maybe inversing that, and spending a lot of time on their social, which is important. I just would put it on that bottom list. And so how do you handle that? There's a wide range to do that. That's probably how I'd focus it, the priorities over the particular role.
I like the S's, the 3 S's. And the site is good because, most people, let's face it, you're going to start out with a guy a guy or a woman that knows how to do mics and sound levels and stuff like that, maybe set some lights. But I think the big challenge I see a lot in churches is knowing when it's time to elevate what you do from a technical person to an idea person, a producer, somebody that really has a bigger vision for that. And And not that a technical person can't grow into that, but most technical men or women are focused on technical stuff because they love it. They're passionate about it, which is great. You need somebody that knows that stuff. But at some point, as you grow as a church, you need to have someone thinking about communicating with the congregation. How do we engage the outside community? How do we create, like you say, social media pieces? And so that's a big question to me, is knowing when to not necessarily transition, because you're always going to need the technical people, but when to add maybe a more gifted communicator, idea person, producer, somebody in that kind of a role. I think that's important.
Yeah, just to zoom back for a second as well, like producers super helpful because they have the big picture. Again, these are some of the churches like, wait, how many people do you have on staff? Which is a wonderful problem to have. If to keep it very basic or at least mid-level, if you're looking at the AV and the L, audio, video, and lighting, and like where do you put resourcing and where do you need to hire towards, I would definitely push churches towards the A. I like to say it this way: our eyes are very forgiving. What I'm willing to look at, frankly, our eyes are very, very forgiving, right? People will watch full-length movies on this device, and they'll look at the screen. It's incredible what we're willing to compromise in terms of the visual aesthetics. But our ears are not very forgiving at all. If you've been a part of a bad Zoom, the reason I've got a nice mic here, I don't want to be using these guys. I want to be using, because I know people are listening and their ears are very discerning and they're very critical and they won't put up a bad audio. It makes people cringy. And also when it comes to lighting, you could have somebody on stage for 40 minutes preaching and it's all overhead lighting. And so they got the bad bags underneath their eyes. It looks terrible. People by and large won't be concerned about that. But if there's a high pitched frequency that's just squealing through, or they're always popping their P's, then like, that's grating for the next 40 minutes. So AV&L, definitely prioritize any of your audio in terms of your production, your tech, your gear spaces.
Okay. 2 more quick questions, one quick and one longer. Photo teams. Does a church need a photo team? Why do we have a photo team? Or just, do we want to get somebody to take their phone around and take pictures occasionally? What's your attitude towards that?
Is this the quick or the long one, Phil? I'm concerned that you said this is.
Well, not quick, but just I'm going to go into a much longer subject here in a minute.
Okay. I will try to keep it quick then. I will try. So even if it's a photo individual, a photo individual is critical, and it's a photo individual that's moving towards developing a photo team, and then potentially a staff member overseeing this responsibility down the road, because we are all visual learners. Going back to the 3 S's, each of those is a visual medium. Your site, your stream, your social, that's all visual. 80% of people are visual learners. The old saying, picture's worth 1,000 words. Why? Because there's so much that you catch from that. You're not looking to hire a wordsmith. You're not building out teams of penmen and penwomen. This is a very important development for churches, if you haven't gotten to this place yet, to develop your photo teams and photo individuals who are on those teams, because people are so hyper visual. Also, because the bar of entry has come down so far as well over the past decades, that even what you can get pretty good on your phone, and the portrait mode that Apple has, and all the other features that even fake and act as a faux $5,000 camera, is incredible what you're able to do, and not only able to capture it, but you're able to disseminate it from this device as well. I could go on and on, but that's my quick answer in terms of the value of a photo team for any church. If you don't have people taking photos for you, get on that, because you'll get a chance to showcase what God is doing at a much higher level and on a wide range of platforms.
Well, it's funny. I saw a website today from a church that had obviously used all stock photos, and it was just terrible. I mean, there's some good stock libraries out there, but most churches or ministry organizations use cheesy, corny stock footage. The pictures of everybody, doing the high fives and slapping hands, just the stupid shots. And I have a hardcore anti-passion about stock footage. So the more you have, the more you're able to capture stills of your actual church members and the events at your church. That's what should go on the website, not cheesy stock footage of somebody that somebody doing something completely different. So, and there's social media. There's just so many opportunities to use still photos in the life of a church. And again, it goes back to you're telling your story to the community. You're trying to engage people and share what's happening in the church. You put it very well that way.
And
So
just
I
to,
agree.
just to even to dogpile on that as well, I would say that churches that are, if you're on the fence in relationship to this, I would advocate and espouse the idea that a good authentic photo of your people is better than a great stock photo. You might not have the lighting just right. The framing might be a little bit off. It might be a little grainy, but it's your people. And
Yeah.
a good version of your people is better than a great version of someone else's people. So
Boy,
if
well
you're on
said.
the fence again, now a terrible photo of your people is not better than a
And by
great
the
photo
way,
of someone else's.
if you list your staff on your website, you know, oh gosh, get good headshots. Just invest in some good headshots. I see church websites all the time that will have proudly display. Here's our youth director. Here's our worship leader. Here's our secretary. Here's whatever, and they're just horrible. They're just horrible. They're embarrassing. So another reason we need to have better still photos in a church situation. So it's funny. I'm glad you brought. That's an interesting thing because I've never talked much about still photos. I'm a video guy, and so never talked much about still photos in church. But it's a really pretty critical issue. So I think that's good. Okay, so let's get to our big subject today, which is brainstorming. Now, I've had so many people ask us about brainstorming, and is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? I just wanted to ask you how you use it in a church set, if you use it, and how you use it in a church setting, and what people need to know about with a creative team in a church or ministry. What do they need to know about to really amp up the level of creativity that they're creating?
Yeah, so for sure, it needs to be used in any organization, churches in particular as well, because oftentimes, if you're not doing that, what's the old saying? None of us are as smart. None of us are as smart as all of us. And
All
so
of
the
this, yeah.
idea that I'm going to go off to my room and come up with all the awesome ideas, it's not going to be as smart as crowdsourcing it. The other factor is, we're a body, and so pulling in believers with their skill sets, their ideas, not just your own, and doing a holy huddle with you and God. Some LPs, it's just like I'm gonna map out the teaching series for the next 5 years here at my church with just me and God. Well, why not brainstorm with a couple of other people who might have some decent opinions who could throw your way, and you could still be the decider at the end of the day, but at least gather their ideas.
Yeah.
There's many reasons why it's advantageous for churches. Obviously, doing it for your big services, your Christmases and Easters, but beyond that, your regular services. Beyond that, it could be an upcoming outreach, or it could even be upcoming potential ministry endeavors. So, like, we've always done the same ministry year after year, and it's the same. We do the fall festival, we do the trunk or treat, we do Easter baptisms, we do the summer retreats, and it's the same programmatic approach, which is fine. I'm not criticizing that. But if you've done that for the past 10 years, is there ever a chance where you say, let's just dream, let's just all walk into a room, there's a whiteboard behind us, and let's say we were starting from scratch. What would we add? What would we do? And which is a really fun, and actually it's a very nervous endeavor, right? Because you'll do that, you'll write that list, and if we had control and if we were actually in charge here, this is what we do. And you write that list down, and then you compare it to what you're actually doing, and it's a record scratch moment, right? And you're like, oh my goodness, we are in charge. Why are we doing this list when we really feel this list is the right one to do? So even not even like creative ideas, like, right, what's the right song? Just even programmatically, what we want to do as a church and what gets us there. It's super, super helpful in a lot of different venues, in a lot of different departments, with a lot of different people.
So outside of just walking into a room with a whiteboard and encouraging ideas, how do you actually start? Well, give me some techniques for getting a good brainstorming session going, and how do you maximize it?
Yeah, I'll break it into my ideas in 3 major sections: before the meeting, during the meeting, and then after the meeting. Okay. So just parking for a while in the before the meeting is invite the right people. And what I mean by that in terms of the right people is the old adage when it comes to improv is yes and. So they'll say yes to an idea, and then they'll add to it. That same principle in improv where you're responding positively to your fellow
Right.
actor, and adding to the scene is the same idea in a brainstorming. You
Yeah.
don't just fold your hands. We don't have the budget, or that didn't work at my
Yeah.
last church. Like, they are not the people that you want in
No.
this room.
No. And there's plenty
Keep
of
them
those
out.
on the church staff. Trust me, plenty of those
Yes.
negative people. Yeah.
So invite the right people. Invite people outside of your department or outside of your quote unquote creative team. I use this example all the time. I was in a church, big church. We had about 7 campuses, and we had one of the production guys at one of our campuses was named Tito, and he was a mild spoken guy. Wasn't very assuming in the way he presented
Yep.
himself, but he was an idea machine. And every time that we had a brainstorming, I was like, we got to have Tito in the meeting as well, because it's outside of his lane, and he would have the best ideas he brought to the table. So sometimes we think it's like, okay, it's we're planning the service for Christmas, and it's like, let's have the worship team members to be a part of this meeting. Well, sometimes it might be your nursery worker who's got the best ideas.
Well, okay, let me build on that for a minute, because that's
Yes,
really a
and.
good point. Years ago, I had a friend in Seattle who had made millions and millions and millions in technology. And he launched a firm. He bought a gigantic resort and launched a firm where big companies who had hit a wall with an idea would come to him. Maybe Schwinn was thinking of their next bike, and they had hit a wall and they couldn't come up with what that would be. So they would come to him, and he would bring the most diverse range of people you can't believe. He'd bring a college football coach, a military general, a housewife, a brain surgeon, all to the table. And so, because he wanted, okay, so how would a brain surgeon approach this problem? How would a military general approach this problem? How does a housewife approach the problem? How does an insurance agent? And so every time a company would come to him with a huge problem, he'd get a new team of people, all from these incredibly diverse backgrounds, and to solve the problem. And so I'm totally with you. I'd never just assume a grandma or a housewife or a football coach in your congregation is not going to be able to contribute, because they're looking at it from a completely different perspective than we are. And that's very often the idea that changes the world.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great summary word for what we are both hitting on: diversity. How do you have diversity of perspective, diversity of thought, diversity of motive as well? There's a lot that you want to bring to the table there. Some other stuff that I would say is helpful, especially this is for myself, where I love to shoot from the hip. So like, I love to come into brainstorming meetings. You tell me what the subject is as we're walking from our offices to the conference room. That invigorates me. Like, I want to come in fresh and hot. Yeah. My best idea is usually my first idea. Like, multiple iterations don't get better for me. It's just like, that's all I got. But there's a lot of other people who aren't wired that way. They like to noodle on ideas. They like to play with it in their minds. That you put them on the spot and they freeze up. And so the reason I'm saying that is, communicate the scope in advance. Like, don't just say, I want to talk about student ministry. Okay, well, what aspect of it? What are the guardrails? Where are we going? For those people who need to know what the play, where the fences are in the playground, give that to them in advance. And then another really big thing, again, this is even before you step into the meeting, check the identities at the door. What I mean by that is, if you invite in the lead pastor, or you invite in the executive pastor, or whoever it is, it's the head elder is there, or it's the finance director who holds the purse strings. They may have an undue amount of weight in the room just based upon their title or their presence. And so when I say we're evaluating ideas in this meeting, we're not evaluating where the ideas are coming from, because sometimes, again, it's the janitor who has the best idea. Well, if they have the best idea, their idea should win, not just because it's coming with the title. One of the things I like to do to minimize that is just to get a Google Doc in advance and say, everyone write down your ideas and put them on here with no names attached. And then we're going to throw them up and we're going to evaluate the ideas, and we don't know that's coming from the lead pastor. And so if we all say, it's not good, we have that freedom to do that. Those are a couple of ways to, again, set up everyone for success even before the meeting starts.
Now, how do you in my early training, particularly in advertising, it was never judge ideas in the brainstorming session, because you just don't know which idea could pop up, and how do you evaluate the stuff you're coming up with? I mean, ultimately, okay, if we could shoot our choir singing on the top of the Himalayas, that would be awesome. At some point you've got to say, okay, we got to cull this list a little bit. How do you do that?
Yeah, so that's we were framing things before. We're framing some things during the meeting, and then some things after. This is in my mind, like towards the end of the meeting, is I always like to come back towards the list of ideas and just like let's run through it again, because sometimes you got a great presenter, right? Maybe their
Yeah,
idea is mediocre, but their energy is through the roof, and they're doing a sales pitch on the idea, and everyone's getting excited about it based upon the presenter and their salesmanship of it. Whereas, okay, it's an hour-long meeting, we now come back to that idea 30 minutes afterwards and we just look at it on paper. It's like, I don't
yeah.
think it's got as much jazz. So give yourself some breathing space from when it was presented to when you do the evaluation. That'll give you some clarity of thought in relationship to the longevity of the idea.
That's really good. Now, let me throw, if I can, let me throw some things at you because I've always been really skeptical about brainstorming. I mean, I've been in
Oh, yeah.
writers' rooms in Hollywood. I love kicking around ideas with people, but you brought up some really interesting things that I've always been nervous about. I'll tell you why. I'm hesitant with brainstorming because very often the loudest person in the room is not necessarily the smartest person in the room. And so you've got some people they'll just blurt out whatever comes off the top of their head and they're loud and they're obnoxious. And other people who may be brilliant are much more timid, they're much more quiet, and they kind of get stepped on. How do you manage that in a session?
Great question. A facilitator. So the facilitator's job is just to do what you said right there. It's to tamp down on that loud, bombastic voice and say,
Yep.
okay, Frank, we've heard 10 ideas from you now. Pipe down. And Jane, yep, we haven't heard one yet from you. Why don't you speak? So a facilitator will do that and will validate those people who need that and pull back the people who don't. The other thing too is I liken it to, this is a great metaphor, I liken it towards popcorn popping. Because if you don't have a gifted facilitators, they're pulling everyone out. They're making sure ideas get written down, because sometimes people to say stuff and no one's writing any of it down, and you come like, what do we say? And then there's this critical moment where they're able to capitalize on momentum in the meeting and to keep it moving forward. I liken it towards when popcorn is popcorn. So you put the bag in the popcorn, you set it for 2 minutes, and then for the first 90 seconds, nothing happens, right? It's just heating up. But then about 90 seconds, you hear pop, 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 and it starts to go real fast. And it's during that critical moment as a facilitator where you're just trying to catch that lightning in a bottle and say, that's great. Who's next? Who's next? Let's go. What do you have to say about that, Frank? And it really builds. And there's always that pivotal moment in those meetings. Hopefully there's that pivotal moment where a facilitator is doing a good job of not lingering on one idea so well, but you can feel this groundswell of ideas coming up, and you're almost just trying to open up the floodgate and allow everyone to participate in that critical moment.
Yeah, another issue that you addressed actually earlier, but is creative people all process differently. So I'm one of these guys that I'm not going to pop off a bunch of ideas in a brainstorming session. I need to think about it a little bit. And so I would rather just sit there, let everybody else talk and yap and throw out ideas. I'm going to be making notes. And it's just interesting that I'd rather go back to my office, honestly, by myself and come up with it. Often with our team, I will encourage them, look, I'll give you the scope of what we're trying to do. Here's the challenge. Go work on it individually. And then they come to the brainstorming session prepped, ready to go with really good quality ideas. So some of them that needed that time to just think about it, have it. Others that are ready to pop off at any moment can do that. So I think the leader of the session really needs to be aware that different people process creativity differently. And sometimes the quietest person in the room may be the most creative. So don't allow them to get stepped on or ignored, because you have to be really sensitive to everybody's style, I guess you'd say.
And that facilitator not only needs to be able to understand individuals and how to best pull out them, they need to understand the tone of the room, how to read it, and what needs to be shared and stated at a particular time. So what I mean by that is oftentimes you go into the meeting at the beginning and there's a bit of trepidation, right? I'm going to present my babies, my ideas, and someone's going to say, oh no, it's a bad idea. And so when I'm facilitating, I love to diffuse any of that tension, and I'll say it up front. Okay, it's the 9-1 ratio. There's going to be 9 ideas that are bad. There's going to be 1 that's good. And that's okay. I'm valuing all the ideas, even the bad ones. And let me go first. I always start with the example of clowns. Whatever the event is, I say we need clowns at this event, and it's the manger, it's Christmas Eve service and baby Jesus and clowns, and
You
everyone's
got
like,
to
oh, that's such a terrible idea, and it diffuses things right away with saying, okay, if
Yeah.
maybe someone will top that idea in terms of dumbness, but if not, that's a pretty dumb idea, and I
Yeah.
feel safe sharing it here with you, and we're all safe to do that. So there's that time where in that moment, the first couple of minutes in the meeting, everyone's saying, is this a safe place where I can share my dumb ideas, or am I going to get kind of criticized? And if so, then if that happens at the beginning, the next 60 minutes is a waste. And there's been times where I've led a meeting and I felt we went that way. And I said, okay, time out. And, I didn't call anyone out publicly. But I said, time out. Why don't we pause and we'll reset and we'll pick this up next week. And I just realized that the energy at the beginning became critical and no one was going to open up, and it was going to be a waste of the next hour. So that's, as a facilitator, you're reading that room, you're setting the table for everyone to eat and enjoy and have a festive time. And if you found out there's some spoiled food because someone's criticizing, you just say, the meal's adjourned and we'll pick this up tomorrow.
Well, it kind of goes back to your original thought was get the right people in the room. You want mature people so that they're not going to get their feelings hurt. I don't want a bunch of people in there that every time they say, no, that won't work, or that, we don't have the budget for that, they get their feelings hurt. They shut up. I don't want them in the room. I want the people that you can be honest with and really kick around ideas. That's how you build a great team. So chemistry is really important. I think chemistry is incredibly important for your creative team. So I would just tell churches and ministry organizations, who are those people? Who is that relatively small group? I don't know how you feel. I don't know how many, I go, when it comes to meetings, generally, I go with that Jeff Bezos quote that you should never have more in a meeting than you could feed with 2 pizzas. If you have more than that, it gets unwieldy. You lose control. People spin off and start checking their email and not paying attention. I want it to be a small, tight, really great chemistry group of people. And so I think if we spent more time really thinking about who those people are that we want in the room. I mean, Hollywood, when I think of sitcom writers, the writer's room is so important. I mean, only have 4 or 5, maybe 6 writers at the most. And they're completely frank with each other. They're knocking each other's ideas around, and they take turns writing each other's scripts and contributing and editing. So that kind of chemistry, I think, is exceptionally important if you really want to have, and of course, no bullies in the room. I don't want somebody with an ego who's going to feel like he's got to be in charge all the time. It's just got to be a really gracious group of people.
And it takes time to develop that. Like you said, chemistry doesn't happen overnight. And so you'll figure out who those right people are, and who to invite into those meetings and who not to.
All right. Any thoughts about brainstorming? What have we left out?
Just as we're landing the plane, so we talked about some thoughts in advance before the meeting, some best practices during the meeting, some stuff in terms of how you're landing the plane with the meeting, and then going from there is a couple things. Like you've documented everything, but what are the next steps? So sometimes you have these great ideas, and oftentimes that next steps isn't in that meeting itself, but making sure that it's clear, because someone may talk. And again, if you're like service planning, okay, so wait. So we just said like 10 things. Is that all? Who's doing all those things? Making sure that you follow up with the clear ideas that you're executing on, and then who's responsible for them. And then the other thing too is sometimes what I'll say is right idea, wrong meeting. What I mean by that is you may, in your brainstorming, coming up with an awesome idea. That is an awesome idea. That that zip lining, the pyrotechnic moment that we talked about, and all the fire coming up, that doesn't work in our adult venue, but it does work on our student venue. So it's the right idea but wrong meeting. And so share those killer ideas you came up with, and then pass them along to whoever needs to be aware of, like, hey, we came up with this great idea. It may or may not work in your environment. Clearly doesn't work in ours. So
Dawn Baldwin, who I think is one of the great church communicators of all time. Whenever I'm in a session with Dawn, she'll always put up a parking lot list, and for the people that throw out a great idea, but it's just not appropriate for this meeting, let's put it in the parking lot and go deal with it later.
Well, smart.
That lets them know they've been heard. She writes it on the big Post-it note up on the wall, but it's not for this meeting. So I think you're exactly right. You need to have that list, because you never know. the next meeting, it could be great for them. So that's a great idea. I do think, by the way, I'll talk a little bit more about next steps because, you know, idea people are a dime a dozen. It's the people who can execute ideas that are really, really valuable. And so, how do you
Yep.
take the results of that great session and really execute what needs to be taken care of?
Well, first of all, I would make sure some of those people are in the meeting itself, where they can do a little pump on the brakes and say, "Hey, that's not going to work. We wanted to do a kabuki drop." I don't know if your listeners are aware of this. It's when you have basically a big curtain,
Yep.
and you at some point you just drop it on down to do a reveal. And we were going to do this at one of our major service events, and it was great. We all loved it, and it was like, let me get a production director in here and
Yeah.
discuss it with Al.
Can we
And
pull
he's
it
like,
off?
yeah.
Yeah.
And so in the meeting, not only ideators should be in the meeting, but some of the executors, where it's fun to come up with these harebrained ideas, but then just pawning it off on somebody else at the last minute and say, you got to figure it out, is
Yeah.
not fair to them. And so now I don't think it needs to be 50-50 in terms of ideators, executors. I think it's
Right.
probably more, it's a brainstorming meeting, but you
Even
need
if
a
it's
couple
only
of
one or
people.
two people who can
Yes.
execute. Yeah,
Yes.
that's good.
And they'll be able to give you that reality. From a budget standpoint, it might be, is it the finance director? We can, they say no at the end, or they give the thumbs up or the thumbs down. It's helpful to have a couple of people kind of tethered towards reality to see if these unrealistic ideas can actually be pulled off.
Last thing as we wrap this up, I've always been a big believer in having every church in America needs an R&D department. They need to have a group of people whose sole purpose, I should say not sole, but primary purpose, is to just come up with new ideas that whether they work or not. Let's just experiment, constantly be thinking, okay, what can we do to make our website better? What can we do to make our social media better? What apps should we be working with to track our congregation? I just don't think pastors, and I understand money's tight and budgets are difficult, but having a couple people on your team who are essentially the research and development guys who can constantly be thinking about trying and you kind of take the mandate off of them to be successful because research and development isn't always successful. We're expanding our tent pegs here. We're trying to get new territory. So, but I just would encourage people to think. I mean, give me your thoughts on that. Have you discovered that that's a great idea?
R&D people and R&D environments, it's critical. What I mean by environments is, where are those safe places where you can try ideas out, and if it works, it works, and if it doesn't, it's not a major issue. A real practical example of this is, I've been thinking through, I was at a baseball game, and I hadn't seen a baseball game for a while. It's kind of aging myself, but if you haven't watched baseball in a while, there's walk-up music. And so as the guy moves from the batter's box to take the plate, there's his favorite tune that's playing for 15-20 seconds to kind of get him hyped up. And I was like, oh my goodness, like that's so fun. And like, what is my walk-up music when I wake up in the morning of my days? What am I playing to get not me hyped up, but what is setting my mood for the rest of the day? What's that internal soundtrack that I listen to that tells me this is the way to do it? And so I'm like, man, that's kind of fun. I would love to do a message series based upon that. Like, what would it look like? And so I just crowdsourced with my staff members. I said, hey, what's your walk-up music? What gets you amped? And as we did a staff meeting, as different staff members were coming in, we played that, and they weren't aware, like they didn't know why I asked, right? I just wanted to see how it would feel when they came in. And some people were like, they're totally living it, and they were jiving and walking into that walk-up music, and some people were a little shocked and startled. And so I'm like, okay, that works in that environment. Can that be extrapolated and play and work in a service environment? I'm still not sure. But I'll tell you this, I would have no idea if I didn't have an R&D environment that I could have tried that out on to see whether or not that worked. So again, what are those places? A couple of places it's not your Christmas and your Easter service. It's not in your kids' ministry. Your parents don't want to know that your kids are being, test tubes. Students is usually a safe place to do it, because it's a place where the more wild and woolly, the better. And staff meetings are a great place to do it as well. I wouldn't strictly use your student environment for the place to try things out, because at the end of the day, sometimes it can start to feel like, hey, this is just a hot mess, and there's no structure or order or excellency in our student department, but it's just a place where we try out the crazy ideas. So try it there and find some other places like a staff meeting.
I've never thought of it in terms of environment, but you're right. I've worked at churches and ministries. I had a ministry one time that did great work feeding hungry people overseas. Great work. But everything there was $1 in. If we spend $1, we've got to make sure we get $1 back in fundraising to make this work. And that just trapped them. They weren't willing to try anything new. They weren't willing to experiment, and they were just stuck in this $1 in, $1 out mentality. And a lot of churches are the same way. They feel like if we're not making something off of every dollar we spend or every hour we invest, we're failing. And it's not true at all. I mean, and the funny thing about the baseball walk-up music, what really stuck out to me in your story was you were thinking about this at the game. I mean, this idea hit you out of nowhere at the game. You didn't go there to come up with ideas. That was not a brainstorming session. It was a baseball game. But you're so in tune with new ideas that struck you as, hey, this could work in other venues, other places. So I would just encourage people listening or watching to this thing. Brainstorming is for everybody. Creativity is for everybody, and always be aware of it. I mean, I joke about this a lot. I have this little leather wallet I got. All it does is hold white index cards. I never want to be caught without being able to write an idea down. I mean, the truth is, as you know, Ben, ideas are the most fragile things in the world. And if you don't write them down, you'll forget about them. You'll absolutely forget about them. And so I'm just a big proponent of get your whole lifestyle set around being receptive to creative ideas, because you don't know if you're in the doctor's office, the waiting, line at the grocery store, wherever, when that idea that could change your whole life could hit you. And if you don't write it down, you'll completely forget about it. Last thought, last words.
Last thought, last word is, since you talked about writing down ideas, give yourself time and space to listen. And I'm preaching to the choir here. Most of my commutes into the work I'm listening to a podcast. When I'm driving home, I'm watching YouTube videos from someone else. A lot of my downtime is spent listening to other people speaking into my life, not allowing space for God to speak into my life, not allowing myself to speak into my life, my own ideas that would naturally come if I just stopped listening to other people for a bit. So when you have those shower moments, when you have those commute moments, when you have those opportunities to go for a walk and just tune out anyone else's voice and see if anything comes to mind, it is a dying art in our world, myself included, to hear from yourself. So give yourself those opportunities.
Well, in my book, Ideas on a Deadline, one of the most powerful tools that I recommended is take a walk. When you've hit a wall, when you're coming up, whether you're beating your head against a wall, nothing's working, just go out and take a hike. I mean, throughout history, Beethoven, all kind of brilliant geniuses throughout history took walks. And when they hit a wall, when they were struggling to come up with the next great idea, they would go for a walk. And there's something about it that you're not focusing on the idea. You're not thinking hard about it. You're just rambling around, and suddenly connections start being made in your subconscious, and suddenly the idea comes in. And so that's good advice. Good advice. Well, thanks for being on today. This is great. I think the more we can talk to church media people and communication people about ideas and how to generate them, how to handle brainstorming sessions, the better, because it's not something you learn in seminary or Bible college or even university. So I think this is great stuff. So thanks so much for being a part of this.
Of course. Thanks for having me on again, Phil.
I always like having Ben on. He's a creative guy. I love the way he inspires people. And by the way, speaking of all this creativity business, if you don't have my book, Ideas on a Deadline, How to Be Creative When the Clock is Ticking, you're making a big mistake. Let me tell you, you don't have to wait for the idea gods to drop something on you. You don't have to wait for that moment of inspiration, that eureka moment. You can have the amazing ideas when you need them the most. That's what this book is about. I spent my whole career in broadcast television. And they're not going to move networks are not going to move the date of a program because I can't come up with a great idea. I have to hit deadlines. I've had to do it for my entire career. This book is research from Hollywood, from advertising writers in New York, Madison Avenue. This is my own experience. This really outlines how people deliver ideas when they need it the most. And let me tell you, I know creative people, highly creative people, that crumble under the pressure of deadlines. Up your game. Raise the bar when it comes to your creativity and be able to produce the ideas you need when you need them. Let me tell you, that report that's due on Tuesday, that project you have to have finished by next month, that engagement, that meeting you have to prep for, whatever, you can have the ideas that will be really game-changing They're all in this book. They're all the secrets that you need to learn. Ideas on a Deadline, how to be creative when the clock is ticking. I'm going to tell you, you need to get it and it'll change your life. You can get it, by the way, at my blog at philcooke.com, or you can go to Barnes & Noble, Amazon, whatever, and find it there wherever books are sold. I'd encourage you, get Ideas on a Deadline. And check up with philcooke.com. Stay tuned. Come on my blog at philcooke.com, where I'm talking about the kind of ideas that will impact your life, your career, and your future. I'll see you next time.